things. That's neophobia. There's the fear of going to bed. That's clinophobia. There's the fear of public speaking. That's phonophobia. Charlie Brown said, yeah. And there's the fear of making a decision. That's the decidophobia. And then there's the panophobia. That's the fear of everything. Charlie Brown says, that's it. That's the one I got. Some people have that one. There's another fear that I find interesting. It's called the phobophobia. That's the fear of fear. Some people are so afraid of being afraid that they constantly stay afraid because they're afraid they're going to be afraid. Don't ask me to repeat that. But these kind of fears are negative, and some of them we can laugh at, and they're fairly harmless, but there's others that are destructive. Most fears, I think, are destructive and damaging and debilitating and paralyzing is a word I like to use. I find fears have paralyzed me in the past, and they hinder us from functioning effectively. I believe there's many here today in a congregation like this that have some abilities that have been unused, have some talents that have been buried, some gifts that have been forgotten. Why? It's not that you lack the ability to use those things, but it's because you're afraid. I believe we have some singers here that could sing almost as good as Sister Vaughn. But it's fear that has kept you from opening your mouth. I believe there's some Bible teachers here that could teach with the best of them, but fear has kept you from sharing. I was talking with a brother this week. He says, "Oh, man, I think I'm called to be a preacher, but I fear just standing in front of people and speaking." I says, "Well, you don't fear talking to me?" "No." He said, "I don't." "Well, let's bring another one in the room. Do you fear talking to two of us?" "No." "How about 3, 4? How about 10? "Well, I think I could talk to 10. "Okay, how about 20? "Well, probably, "Okay, let's bring in 100. It's just 1, 1, 1, 1, and 1. "How about 10,000? Just speak to one, and then you'll be all right." He had some things to think about that day. You know that parable of the talents? I know many of you are familiar with, but one of them, Jesus scolds because he buried his talents. Well, why did he bury his talents? It says because he was afraid. Sometimes we do that, don't we? What's the major thing that keeps people from witnessing? It's not that they don't know how to share their faith. It's not that they don't care for the unsaved. It's not that they don't want to be used of God. But you said it, Pastor Miller. Fear. Fear of man keeps us from sharing our faith. God's faith in us. They fear they're going to fail. Do you feel failure? Has it kept you back from maybe some business enterprise that you could have done? I remember years ago going to, it's a Christian meeting, but they were talking about maturity, and one of the men there said that maturity, I don't remember everything he said, but I remember this. He says maturity is the ability to take risk. And that takes faith, doesn't it? To take some risk. Now, in a business way, you don't take uncalculated risk. You take calculated ones, but you have to take them nevertheless. You can think, when we were merging our churches, we were aware that we could have thought in one of two ways, because you couldn't have both at the same time, but we could have thought, what if this doesn't work? Or we could have thought, what if this does work? We chose, praise God, with the latter. What if this does work? And that caused us to step out. If we had focused on what if it doesn't work, where would we be today? We would prove it didn't work because we didn't do it. We didn't even try it. I looked at some others that have had fears, some names that you might recognize. Julius Caesar, the emperor of Rome. You know, he was a guy that could shout. But I mean, actually, the shouts of his enemies were like music in his ear. He had no fear of his enemies. But the little known fact, he was afraid of thunder. Just have some thunder in the air, and he would look for the nearest cave to hide in. Julius Caesar. Peter the Great, the Tsar of Russia, great politician, a military leader, was afraid to cross a bridge. He could face armies, but he couldn't cross a bridge. As soon as he'd take that first step onto a bridge, he'd shake and tremble till he didn't know what he was going to do. He couldn't move. I share that with you to say that ordinary people, in some areas of their lives, they can be successful or be victorious, but they can be possessed by an extraordinary fear that keeps them from being what they ought to be. Over in Africa, when I spent some time there, 5 years actually, one of the animals I was impressed with the most was the impala. You probably have seen it at least on television. But the impala is an animal that can leap 10 feet straight up in the air, but do that for 30 feet out. 10 feet up, 30 feet out with one leap. Graceful, beautiful as you see them going through the savannah of Kenya and East Africa. But you know, you can take an impala and put it in a zoo and confine it in an enclosed area with just a 3-foot wall. How can you do that? You ask. You may ask. Well, it's because an impala will not leap unless it sees where its feet are going to land. Sometimes we don't leap unless we see where our feet are going to land. But how many of us can see 2008 and know where we're going to land? The old saying is, I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. That should be enough for us. Fear will only keep you in your pen. But it's faith that will help us to leap 10 feet up and 30 feet out, trusting that God will guide where our feet land. I just wonder if there's some here today that are neutralized or paralyzed by fear. God has not given us a spirit of fear. So where does that fear